Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello everyone, welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man. And joining me today is going to be William Gleeson, who also likes to go by Bill. And we're going to be talking about his new book that's recently come out called Before the Delusion. And it talks a lot about pagan Christianity that was before the church. And he can, probably explain this a lot better than I can. So, William, how are you doing today?
Yeah, good morning, Royce. I'm fine, thank you.
I'm doing just great over here, too. I want to thank you for coming on the show, and I want to apologize for, missing our last appointment like I did. But everything's all fixed up now.
Well, good to hear that.
Now, before we get started here, and pardon me for that little frog in my throat there, I want to mention to everybody that William's website, if y'all want to learn more about him, is www.beforethedelusion.com. And if y'all have any questions, y'all can feel free to call in at 832-632-7904. Okay. William, I don't know what's getting into me tonight. It might just be the weather. We're getting a lot of wet weather around here. The humidity might be getting to me. But at any rate, I was going to say, why don't we start this out by you telling the listeners exactly what it was that got you interested in this particular topic. But before we do that, can you check and see if you have your speakers on or an extra microphone on or something like that? Because I'm getting an echo.
Oh, yeah, I'm afraid I can't do that. I have experienced that recently, and I have tried to check it, and I have been unable to fix it.
Oh, okay.
So,
well,
is it really bad?
Only when I speak, but I think I can be made out. People in chat will tell us in just a minute if it's okay on their end. I notice it is very noticeable to me. As soon as I get some word in the chat room about it's, bad from them, I'll let you know.
Okay.
But in the meantime, why don't you go ahead and tell everybody exactly what got you interested in the particular topic of this book?
Yeah, okay, thank you. I researched this book for 12 years. I'm not a scientist, really. My day job is in business science, in biotech business, my day job. But I got interested in science reports of early reports of the Egyptian pyramids from the 1800s, and I read that stuff as a hobby for a number of years, and I noticed several problems, you might say inconsistencies and anomalies in the reports, and that led me to dig into it a lot more. And of course, all of those old reports, the early European exploration of Egypt and ancient Egypt and the pyramids dates from the 1800s, and those reports are all on record. But of course, it's pretty boring stuff. And so, when I found a lot of inconsistencies in it, I sat down to see if I could write it into a story, into a novel that was more readable. And that's what I've come up with.
Now, as I understand this, this is written in a novel format, but isn't it based around true research and true facts?
Yes, it is. I have created a fictional character, a scholar in the Vatican, who has access to all of the old pre-Christian books in the library, and he compiles his own story. So that's the storyline. But then the content that he discovers is all taken from real scientific reports over the years going back into the 1800s, and even before that. And all of that material is all footnoted and referenced in the book so that those people who have got an inclination to look it up for themselves can do so. But the book itself just reads like a story, so anyone can read it like a novel, and people tell me it's really interesting and entertaining to read.
I'm quite sure it is. Now, a lot of your subject talks about the pagan world, religion that was around before the Christianity as we know it now. Wouldn't this be the same paganism that was around before Judaism?
Yes, that's correct. Probably the dominant, if you like, sect or culture prior to Judeo-Christianity was probably the Gnostic movement, and that was an abstract belief in some kind of mystical power that was not understood. And that was the dominant cultural belief prior to Judeo-Christianity. And it's hard to pin down exactly what the Gnostics believed in because it was an abstract concept of some kind of higher power.
Yeah, I know that they not long ago they found the Nag Hammadi library, but I believe in your book you were mentioning some other discoveries that you wrote about in your book. Well, I don't have it right smack in front of me, but I mean you did some a sweep of history of the archaeological ruins of Babylon and Egypt, the ancient scriptures of the Hebrew, megalithic monuments at Karnak, Nagrange, and Stonehenge. So you're not just getting all your sources from Gnostic then, are you?
No, absolutely not. I have referred to the Nag Hammadi library, of course, which describes a lot of Gnostic belief, and I've related that to, principally the ancient Egyptian pyramid texts and the so-called Book of the Dead, which is very similar. So the Nag Hammadi library is usually interpreted in a mystical or religious sense, and I've related that to very similar language which is in the Egyptian pyramid texts and Book of the Dead, which actually has a material, technological context. It was even the Egyptian literature tended to be translated around the turn of the 20th century, around late 1800s, early 1900s. That literature tended to be translated and interpreted in a religious context. But the theme of my book is to show that there's a great deal of language in the Egyptian pyramid texts which we can see now in a material, technological context. It's not religious at all. It's technological, and that's just a difference in view.
Okay. Now, also you mentioned in here about Flavius Josephus talking about the forefathers of Abraham building 2 towers of stone. Now, I think I heard a similar story. Wasn't one of them built of stone and one of them built of brick?
Yeah, that's correct.
And they recorded history on it. The idea was to protect it from flood and from fire? Correct,
yes. Flavius Josephus was a Jewish historian. That's a Romanized name, of course, but he was actually from Jerusalem around about 70 AD. So his book, The Antiquities of the Jews, is probably one of the most important history books that we have, written by a known person from a known time, and we have the complete copy. Curiously, it's very relatively little recognized. But yeah, he he certainly wrote that the forefathers of Abraham built the towers of brick in Mesopotamia and the towers of stone in Egypt, which of course corresponds to what we know as the ziggurats and the pyramids.
Which is really very interesting because Plato talks about a stele in Egypt that Solon showed him that recorded the history of Atlantis. So I can't help but wonder if this wouldn't be one of the two towers that Flavius wrote about.
Well, I agree. I would think that's a very obvious conclusion to come to. Of course, others would say, it's difficult to prove that, but of course it's difficult to prove, but it's a
pretty logical nonetheless.
It's very logical, correct, yeah.
And, so we do know that there was a Garden of Eden once that could have been known as, well, actually, if you go back and read your Bible, from my understanding, they didn't stay in Eden. They left Eden at some point and moved somewhere to the east, but it didn't say where, and this was before Noah's flood. So the actual spot they moved to could have been the spot of Atlantis, which would have been their home right after Eden. That would have made a lot of sense.
Well, again, that's a possibility. I think for various reasons, actually, that it was the other way around. That it was after the fall. That if you call it Atlantis, that it was after the fall of Atlantis that survivors actually settled in Mesopotamia.
Oh no, they did settle in Mesopotamia later after the flood. I meant between Eden and before Mesopotamia.
Well, I've lost your thread now. Sorry.
Okay, I might have did that a little too quick. No, what I was referring to was maybe what Atlantis was this time frame after they got kicked out of the Garden Eden, but before they ended up in Mesopotamia. In other words, somewhere in between those two.
Yeah, that's possible. I have tried not to get too exacting about time frames. It gets to be very difficult to prove.
That's true.
Exactly when something happened, and I think sometimes that detracts from trying to understand what happened. We get into arguments about exactly when it happened. Those two things can get confused.
Well, arguing is non-productive anyway.
Yeah, we're discussing.
There you go, we're discussing. I like that better. I don't really, well, I do it a lot more than I'd like to, but I'm not fond of arguing. I'll put it to you that way. Boy, I mean, this here humidity tonight is something else. Anyway, going right on along with this here, so you went from the actual research of reading Josephus's book, which, by the way, I downloaded a PDF copy of that from online, and I realized that this book has got like over 2,000 pages in it.
Yeah, it's a big book, and it was written by a known person in about 70 AD, and it was written in Greek, so there's not a lot of difficulty in translating it and understanding it. So it's an extremely valuable resource, but it's usually overlooked.
Well, yeah, that is true, but the good news is you can download it from free online in PDF format from Gutenberg is one place, but I'm sure there's other places you can get a free copy of it if you're interested in reading what was in it for yourself.
I'm sorry, Royce, I'm having, you're breaking up.
Okay, am I still breaking up? Are you there? Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, but I'm having difficulty hearing you now.
I don't know if that's on your end or if it's on my end. I tell you what, I think I got a phone number for you as well. We could try to disconnect from here and see if I can get you on the phone.
Yeah,
and if I can't,
you're breaking up.
Yeah, if we can't get you on the phone, I could try to call you back here and see if it's better the second time around. Do you want me to try to recall you and hope we get lucky?
I'm only hearing you intermittently.
Do you want me to try to recall you? Or call you back?
Yeah, that'd be worth a try.
Okay, let's try it. Okay. Okay, everybody, bear with me for just a couple of minutes here. It would appear as though we had to disconnect. We were breaking up, some kind of technical difficulty going on, and I will try to get him back on the line. Well, I lost his name. That's why. That could be a problem. Folks, I don't see his name on the list, although I had it just a few minutes ago. Let me check the email, see if I got his phone number on that. No, I don't see it there. Invalid phone number. Well, I had his... Something's going wrong.
Morning, Bill Gleeson.
Yeah, Bill, this is Royce.
Yeah, hi.
I am sorry about what happened a minute ago, but I thought it might be better to try back on the landline than it would be on the, on the Skype phone, since we seem to be having difficulty with our connection.
Yep.
You sound just fine now. Do I sound okay to you?
Yep, that's great. Yeah, I agree. That's much clearer.
All right, well, then let's go ahead and see if we can remember where we were at. I know we had just finished talking about Josephus, and I think I was just telling everybody that if they wanted to, they could get a copy of his book online at Gutenberg in PDF format for free, and there might even be other places for those that want to read it by themselves. Now, as far as the ruins of Babylon and Egypt, what I wasn't clear of from your description is, have you actually been to Babylon and Egypt yourself, or have you studied the works of others that have been there?
Yeah, the latter. I have not been there myself. What I have done is spent years researching the earliest European exploration reports, and that's what led me to write this book. Because as I trawled through all of the old research reports, the very earliest European reports, it was clear that there were a lot of anomalies in those reports from what we now believe. For example, the main thing that struck me immediately was that it's known that the pyramids are at least 400 to 500 years older than is commonly claimed now, and that research was done actually quite in the 1980s, quite recently, by a Harvard professor, Mark Lehner, and you can read his reports anywhere. But there was what was called a pyramids carbon dating report study that was done in the 1980s. They took numerous samples of organic traces from the mortar of the Great Pyramid, and those samples were analyzed in independent labs, and they showed conclusively that the age of the pyramids is 400 to 500 years earlier than the usual textbooks say, and those reports are all on file. Usually today, the Great Pyramid is attributed to Cheops about 2600 BC, but the actual carbon dating reports show that it's more like 2900 to 3000 BC in round figures. So that's a factual, modern, scientific anomaly that's not usually remarked on.
Okay. Now, I think part of what you were talking about in your book was magic and alchemy. The pyramid texts reflect that this was in use back in the days of Egypt?
Yeah, that's another thing that is in the old reports. Everyone I think agreed that the earliest records of Babylon and Egypt, that their culture, if you like, wasn't what we call religion. It was more magic and alchemy, and that was regarded as being a pagan mystery. But again, if you go back now and look at the origin of what they believed, you can see a technological explanation for it, not a religious mystery explanation. it was the case that the European explorers, particularly in the late 1800s, were very Eurocentric gentlemen scholars from an age where the Christian religion was very, very dominant, and those scholars tended to interpret everything from a very Christian point of view. So anything they didn't like, they classified as alchemy or magic in a very derogatory sense. But if you go back and look at the reports, you can now see a technological basis for that. It wasn't mystical at all.
Okay, I see where you're coming from on that. So the things that they called alchemical or called magical was really scientific and technological, and it was just renamed more or less.
Yeah, correct. You know, it was in that very Christian time, it was very fashionable to sneer and deride at the old pagan beliefs, which it suited them to denigrate anything that was pre-Christian.
And this is also having to bear in mind and remember that there wasn't even any monotheism till Akhenaten and Moses.
Yep. Correct.
So that means that monotheism is a latecomer to the scene to begin with, and the records write backwards before they even go forward.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. But, Judeo-Christian monotheism is a very late comer.
Well, I do know that there was a lot of things that had been, suppressed, and a lot of books that have been burnt, and a lot of things were claimed heretical, whether they really were or not, or you can't say they were really lying if you look at it. Well, it's their opinion. They're entitled to it, I guess. But nonetheless, what we would consider, at any rate, let's take, say, levitation, for example. People of that time would probably consider that either alchemical or magical or supernatural or something of that nature. But nowadays, we were learning that you can use sound waves to displace gravity and make things levitate, and that's purely scientific. Why would it have to be any different back in the days you're referring to?
Well, I guess I agree in principle. I don't know about the particular example, but in principle, yeah, there were certainly anomalies. There were, if you like, more mundane anomalies at that time. And for example, I was in the British Museum only a couple of weeks ago, looking at the ancient Egyptian displays. And there's a display in there of an Egyptian a stone vase made of basalt. It's about a foot high, and it's dated. You know, the sign says it's dated from 3000 BC, and it's absolutely symmetrical, and it has a shaped lip with a sharp edge and so on. It looks exactly as if you saw it today, you would say it's been molded or machined, because it's absolutely perfectly symmetrical. But the problem with that is that it's made of basalt, which is absolutely the hardest natural stone known, and the only way you can cut basalt is with diamond tools. And so it puzzles me as to how the archaeologists and Egyptologists reconcile those things when, they claim that at 3000 BC, the Egyptians were basically peasants in loincloths with flint tools, but at the same time they put on display a basalt vase that looks as though it's been machined.
In fact, how could they say that with the way that the Pyramid of Giza was built? I mean, you didn't do that with flintstone.
You wouldn't think so, would you? No. And again, even again, the texts that are on record, again, you can look them up on Gutenberg, but Flinders Petrie, who the British Egyptologist, he's usually called the father of Egyptology because he was the first person who brought any kind of science to Egyptology. Before that, in the 1800s, the explorers were pretty much Indiana Jones kind of people who were looking to find buried treasure and so on. But Flinders Petrie was the first really scientific Egyptologist, and he sent samples back to London of stone that's still got saw cuts and drill tracings in it from obvious mechanical tools. And those samples are on record, and the samples are actually in the museum, although they're not on display because it's inconvenient to put them on display. But the Egyptologists know that there were mechanical tools in those days.
Well, yeah, in fact, I think it's one of the caves or one of the temples has what appears to be a picture of, I think it's like two Egyptians holding what appears to be a great big huge light bulb.
Yeah, I have seen that diagram and or picture, and you can interpret it that way. Yeah. Of course, that a picture, that kind of picture is open to interpretation, but actual stone samples with saw cuts in them are not open to interpretation. That's stone cold evidence.
Yeah, because in the picture you could say it looks like it doesn't mean it is. It could also be something else, but with the actual stone sample, it kind of narrows that down quite a bit. It
does, yeah, yep. So those kind of anomalies led me to think, that not everything there is correct according to conventional wisdom, and that led me to dig into it more and more, and to try and write it up, which I've done. Write it up in a you can't read. Not everyone wants to read hundreds of pages of boring old research reports, but I have picked some interesting bits out of it and written it up into a readable story.
Okay. Now, you've also mentioned places like Stonehenge and Nagrange and that. I think it was Karnak. Can you tell us what role these places play in your story?
Yeah, there are really three sections to my story. The first section is that there was an historic impact, and the survivors of that impact, an asteroid or comet impact, if you want to call it that, and the survivors of that impact migrated to Mesopotamia and Egypt, where they built the ziggurats and the pyramids that we've just talked about. So then the third element of the story, the third section, is that some of the ancient Egyptians migrated west across North Africa and up into Portugal and Spain and into Western France and Britain. So they were the ancient pre-Celts, if you like to use that term, who built the mounds and the stone megalith circles and lines that are at Karnak. So that's the third element of the story. And again, there are early reports going way back into, I think from memory, 1740. There was a report in Britain that all of the big mounds, like not just Stonehenge, but there's another circle at Avebury nearby, and there's an enormous earth mound called Silbury Hill, and all over Britain or not all over Britain, at various other places in Britain, there are very large earth and stone mounds like the ones at Newgrange in Ireland. And going back to 1700 somewhere, there were reports that those mounds were actually a planetary model. Those mounds were set out in a diagram of the planets in the sky. And so that's the third element of my story, that the some of the ancient Egyptians actually did migrate to Britain, and they built the mounds that are there, the mounds and stone circles, as a kind of memorial. It's a big diagram of the planetary history.
It's kind of like our solar system.
Exactly like it. Yes, but recording the history of the impact event.
Okay, I was not aware of that. I mean, I'd heard of Karnak, and well, I think everybody's heard of Stonehenge, but I hadn't heard about it being, laid out like our star system, in other words, or our solar system. So that's pretty much news to me, but it's very interesting at the same time. Yeah,
that is a new suggestion, if you like, a hypothesis that you won't read of that before. Well, the only place you read of that before is if you go back to about 1740 when it was written in the UK. But at that time, of course, everyone said, "Oh, well, that's rubbish. It's not possible that those people understood the solar system, so it's rubbish." But I've researched it and redrawn it, and I hope shown that I believe it was actually true. The alignments at Karnak are there's about five. There are three sets of alignments there extending over about 5 kilometers. That's about, I guess, 4 and a bit of your miles, and there are lines and lines of stones that are set out, tapering down from big stones at one end to little stones at the far end, and getting closer and closer together as you get further away. And if you draw a diagram of that, you can see it's exactly like a comet tail. So it's actually a diagram of a comet in the sky.
Which there's been comet hits before. There will be again. One of the things I was reading in your description was the traces of the reality of Babylon magic and Egyptian was misconstrued as the ineffable Yahweh. So how did this here magic and alchemy that we find out later is science end up being turned into God or Yahweh?
Yeah, you might well ask how that happened. If you read I believe now, I don't know a great deal about Judaism, but my understanding is that Yahweh is what is called the ineffable name of God, meaning it's unfathomable, it's not understood. It's an abstract concept of life and enlightenment, and that is still true, as I understand it. That it is the Jewish tradition that God has no form. The Judaism does not have images of God. That's a Christian invention. It was the Christians who personalized God. So the earliest concept of the Gnostics and then of the Jews, that concept of a supernatural power was an abstract light of wisdom and enlightenment, and it was that light, if you like, that was taken over by the Christians, and they transformed light into enlightenment and transformed an abstract power into a personality. So I believe that's the sort of central delusion of Christianity. And strangely enough, that's actually expressed in the Gospels of Paul. And again I've quoted that God was light, that his God was light, and it was only silly people who turned it into the image of a person.
I think I remember that passage, but it's been a coon's age since I saw it, you might say. But yeah, I think I see what you're talking about. But that for all in the world reminds me of 0-point energy or of ether or both. Is there anything, am I anywhere near close with that line of reasoning?
Well, exactly what the light was is that, of course, is a very central question, and I've attempted to address that. I think I have addressed it, but that's the punchline of the book. So I'm not about to tell you what the punchline is, if you follow me. But yeah, I do believe that the Egyptian pyramid texts describe the origin, or the original Egyptian origin of that light, and it's possible to show a link, quite a clear link, between a material reality in ancient Egypt that later became regarded as magic or alchemy, and then even later became regarded as some kind of mystical event, and then the Christians turned it into a personalized God. So I think that's the trail there. But what the original light was is described in the book, but that's my punchline.
Right, you can't give it away without giving away all the candy in the store.
Right, yeah. You have to read the book for that one.
Okay, well, it sure sounds interesting. And just so everybody will know, you can click on the link underneath his description and get to his book right there at Amazon. I'm pretty sure he has a link to it on his website, www.beforethedelusion.com. And he's also got more information right there at his website. Are you going to have any events coming up in the near future you want to mention to the listeners?
Don't have anything planned. You're correct about those links, and I believe the book's listed currently on Amazon.co.uk, and it's listed on Amazon.com. I believe it'll be available within the next couple of weeks. It's listed there, but it's not physically available yet. But it will be within about 1 or 2 weeks.
Available for pre-order.
It's available for pre-order. Correct. Yeah. In terms of events, no, I'm working with my publisher. My publishers are in the UK, and we're currently working with people in the US on events, but there's nothing specified yet. I'll let you know about that when that happens. We're in the planning. We're in discussions.
Okay. Now, are you planning to write a sequel to this book?
Oh, it depends how it goes. I'm 65 years old, and my wife may divorce me if I write another book. But yeah, there's plenty of information there. What I've written is maybe only half of my research, and so we'll see how it goes. And there's a lot more material there certainly that could be written up.
Oh, I'm quite sure of that one. I've done a lot of study about ancient mythology and ancient religions in my time. But your subtitle on the book is Secret Vatican Files of the Pyramids and Stonehenge. Are you, I know that could be just like a fancy subtitle, but I mean, is there anything that you're knowledgeable of, that there might be any Vatican files about this information?
I'd have to say probably not. I did use that as a literary device, if you like, to create my storyline of a Vatican scholar who researches all of this material. But no, I don't have any personal knowledge of anything, actually in the Vatican files. I've never been in the Vatican files. And ironically, one of the points in my book is, I sort of turned that argument back on myself. It's one of the ironies that actually most of the information that I've relied on is in the public domain. Just as you have looked up Josephus' Antiquities of the Jews and got a PDF on Gutenberg, so almost everything else that I have referenced is available in the public domain. Most of it you can very readily look up on the web, and so that's actually a kind of delicious irony that although I've used that byline as a literary device, the irony is that there's no secrets. So it's all in the public domain.
That is true. The pyramid text you can get in PDF format.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, Book of the Dead. You can easily look up the Book of the Dead.
Yep, all of that you can easily look up and find, and people do. Some people have them available on their websites, in fact. There was something I had on the tip of my tongue just a minute ago, and I'll be doggone if I didn't look in the chat room and see what somebody put in there, and my mind just went...
Oh, it will come back to you in a moment.
Yeah, hopefully it will. But it was something to do with your book, if I can remember. I was curious about this. Oh, I remember what it was now. Have you read Dan Brown's, say, like his Da Vinci Code?
Yes, I have. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Would you say that your book is written in a similar fashion to his? It's kind of like a novel. It has like a storyline going to it, maybe a little adventure and what have you. This here scholar, finds the stuff, and maybe he gets in danger, maybe he don't, or he has to hide from what he found in the Vatican, whatever. But you kind of get the idea, kind of like a adventure novel that just includes real facts like what Dan Brown did.
Well, yes, to a degree. I don't have much sex or car chases. Not a lot of sex amongst Vatican scholars, I imagine. So, yes, your parallel is correct. To a degree that I've created a fictional storyline, and I've created some tension because the Vatican scholar initially starts out on, if you like, an official quest to document what is in the Vatican library, but as he uncovers more and more heresy, then the officials try to stop him from his work to keep everything secret. Yes, I've created a storyline. It's not as racy as Dan Brown, and the other difference I think is that I have tried to walk a line between creating a novel, but also footnoting the references so that, if you like, my story is more documented and referenced, so that people who say, "Wow, I didn't know that," or "I don't believe that," even can actually look it up. They can see where the reference came from, and they can look it up for themselves.
You know what? That's the wonderful thing about the Internet. If you're reading a book and you come to a part you're not sure about, or you're not sure if it's just an interpretation or something, you can Google that bad boy right then while you're reading it. Take a break and Google it and find out everything that everybody has to say about it.
You can, yep. And I've tried not to do that too much because it can be a little disconcerting, if you read every sentence and it's got a footnote. But I've done that enough to where if anything upsets you, you can look it up.
If anything upsets you?
Well, if anything interests you.
Okay.
Well, I guess I have said some unusual things, and so I'm sure that there will be some folks who will say, "Wow, I'm not sure I believe that." So I'm going to check it out myself.
Well, actually, I think it's really good when people do that. It just keeps the creative juices flowing. You got their interest, you got them wanting to learn, and I think usually good things comes out of people, checking things out for themselves.
Yeah, there's a lot of folks from Missouri. You got to show them.
Well, I'm from Texas, but I think I still got some Missouri in me.
Yeah.
I probably got a little of everything in me. My dad always joked that we were Heinz 57s.
Uh-huh.
So this book, when did you say it was coming out again?
Well, it's listed it's listed for pre-order on Amazon.com. And so I'm pretty sure it'll be available next week, actually. They list it officially on August 1.
So it'll be available next week.
Yeah.
And now your website, you're not through building it quite yet, are you?
It's got the front end in there, but it's the rest of it's in progress. But so only the front end is there.
Okay. Well, is there anything you'd like to add to this here that maybe I didn't think to ask? Because honestly, I didn't read your book, so while I'm familiar with the subject, as a general, I'm not familiar with your book, exactly to, have more specific pinpointed questions. So I thought I'd see if there's something maybe you would like to add that I didn't think to get to or wasn't aware to get to.
I think you've done very well and covered the territory fairly well. Perhaps the only other area that we didn't talk about really much at all was the initial comet or asteroid impact event, and I start off with that because I think that's that's the beginning of the story. The survivors came from there, and there's more and more modern scientific evidence of that these days. What I've done is tried to draw together the modern scientific evidence of it. I mean, modern scientists refer to it as the Younger Dryas event, or sometimes in America circles it's called the Clovis Comet discussion. You might have heard of that. But there was, modern science acknowledges there was some kind of major impact event around about 11,000 BC. There's a lot of discussion of that. And what I've done is gone back and looked in the ancient literature and shown that there are historical, often what we call mythological references to it. That mythological is a very, derogatory kind of word, meaning that people didn't quite believe it. But when you add up all those references and you put it with modern science, you can very clearly show that there was a record in human history of a severe impact event. We haven't discussed that, but that's a preliminary to the first part of my book.
Okay. Why don't you go ahead and tell us a little something about that? Or, unless you already just told everything you needed to tell about it. I'm not sure how much more you had.
Well, there's quite a bit of that. I think one of the things that led me to look at that was actually a lecture in New York in 1993. A British fellow called Sir Fred Hoyle. He was a very, very famous astronomer in the 70s and 80s. Probably the originator of a Big Bang theory and that kind of stuff. But he gave a lecture in New York in 1993, and you can look that up on the web if you want to. It was at the Frick Museum in New York. And he pointed out he was a crusty old scientist in those days, and crusty old scientists generally, they're kind of allowed to say what they think, even if it's heretical. But he pointed out, modern science knows for sure at the end of the last ice age, which was only about 11,000 BC, most of the old ice cap melted, and the oceans warmed up and the ocean level rose very suddenly, just, like in about 50 to 100 years, very, very quickly in geological terms. And everyone knows that from a science point of view. But he pointed out the elementary thing, that if the ice melts and the ocean gets warmer, that can't happen according to the laws of physics unless you have an enormous supply of energy. Because it takes energy to melt ice and make the ocean warm at the same time. So he figured out the only way that could happen is if a comet fell into an ocean. So he gave that lecture, and you would think that would have caused a lot of controversy, but it didn't. Everyone just ignores it because for some reason people don't want to know about it. But that was one of the modern bits of science that took my notice. And then if you go back into what we call mythology now, into Greek and Celtic mythology, even into Hebrew mythology, there are lots and lots of records of a comet or stones falling from the sky. And that record is actually in ancient Egypt as well. It's in an inscription in a temple, so you can still go and see that, where the Egyptians wrote on the wall, the sky spat forth a stone. And those words are still there, carved on a temple wall. So I've woven those kind of threads together to show that what we call ancient mythology is gradually being reflected in modern science.
Yeah, there's been other people who have made that same observation. Now, Sandy in the chat room was asking if you've heard of these stone balls that they're finding all around the planet at different locations. She said that they're just perfectly round stones that nobody knows where they came from.
Yeah, I've heard of some of them. Actually, there are some on a beach in New Zealand where I'm from. It's not far from where I am now. Well, closer than you anyway. They're called the Moeraki boulders on a beach in New Zealand. I've read of that, and I haven't looked at it closely. I understand the geologists say that there are reasonable geological explanations as to how that could have happened. So I don't know. I haven't looked at it. All I can say is the geologists say they could be natural. Looking at them, you would think they look pretty unnatural. I haven't gone into it.
Right. Okay, just one last thing I could think of real quick. When you were talking to me about this comet, I remembered the creation story of the Egyptians. It talked about the creation egg, I think it was, that come down. Could this be the comet you're referring to, and they were just using egg as a metaphor for a comet?
Yeah, I believe that's the same thing. Yeah, I absolutely agree. That's in Egyptian and in Greek mythology, that the sky spat forth an egg. So the cosmic egg of Greek mythology, I believe, is
and from the egg came a nut and another god, I believe. I can't remember both the names right off the top of my head, but I mean, you were talking about the comet and the survivors of it, and I'm like, well, that sounds an awful lot like the same thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is allegorical. The story's been passed down as folklore, if you like, or mythology, whatever word you want to use, and it's become embellished, and it's become invariably those stories become humanized or personalized. They start calling them gods or demons, whichever way you look at it. But yeah, the origin was a cosmic event.
Okay. All right. Well, do you have any last-minute thoughts for the listeners?
Yeah, go forth and buy my book and have a good read. I hope you enjoy it.
After talking to you, I can believe it is going to be a good read, and I hope to be able to get myself a copy of it, too. In the meantime, I'm going to call this a wrap for the night. It's been on here pretty close to an hour, and we covered quite a bit of territory. I want to thank you for coming. I want to let you know that I've really enjoyed having you. You're a great guest, and you got a very interesting topic going on here, and it's pretty unique. I mean, you hear a lot of talk about ancient mythology, but the approach of magic and alchemy being science is, the way you approach it, the position from, is a little bit new, an angle, you know what I'm saying?
Yes, I do, and thank you very much for the opportunity to talk with you.
All righty, and, I'm going to try to keep your information, and if you got something else you want to share or whatever, I'd be happy to have you come back to my show again in the future.
I'd look forward to that. Thank you. Thank you very much. You have a good day.
You too now. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.
Okay, everybody. Real quick, before I let everyone go, I want to first thank you guys for coming and participating. Like I always say, I couldn't have a show without my listeners any more than I could have one without my guest. And want to also inform y'all that this Saturday show at 1 p.m., I'm going to have Linnea Lee, and me and her's going to talk about her very first book of Atlantis, which again is a novel, but she also covers some of her beliefs inside of this novel at the same time, and it really made for some pretty interesting reading. I think you'll like it. And she's got like 2 or 3, 4 books out now, and she's working on another one, and we can go into more detail about that Saturday. But I just wanted to let you know that she will be my next guest. It will be 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, and I'm hoping to see everybody there that's able to make it. And I'm going to call that quits right there for now. And you guys have a very good week, what's left of it, and we'll see you here on the next show. Y'all have a good night.